Hey, fellow patriots, I'm Bree.
And I'm Blaze. Some call me Pa. It has been said that we have 4 boxes to keep ourselves free. These are the soap box, the ballot box, the jury box, and the ammo box.
And we are the 4th box. We are here to arm you with enough information, resources, and skills to take back your freedom, increase your self-sufficiency, and inspire you to join in the fight against tyranny.
Thomas Jefferson said, "Eternal vigilance is the price of liberty." Thank you for joining us and for joining in this fight.
Welcome back to the 4th box. Okay, welcome back, friends and patriots. Another week at the 4th Box podcast. Pops, how are we doing this week?
We're doing really well. We had a beautiful weekend here in central Pennsylvania. It was upper 70s. The sky was clear. It was really, really nice. It was like a midsummer weekend. Since then, it has started raining some. We've had pretty much a full 2 days of rain now, but the weekend was wonderful. So all is well. The leaves are all out. The flowers are blooming. It looks like we're ready to head into summer here.
Okay, yeah, good. I'm definitely ready for it. I'm pretty far up north, as you know, so it's honestly still very cold here, but we had a nice warm day today, so it kind of felt the same. We'll see if it lasts. I think everyone's ready for it.
Yeah, we did have a long winter, and it's always nice to see those seasons change and all the new life springing out, and this year no exception. So looking forward to a nice long summer.
Yeah, it's crazy. They keep telling us that the climate is changing, but the seasons still just
They seem very similar to that which we used to.
They keep being seasons.
Yeah.
So I don't know what's happening there.
Yeah, me either. But greetings as well. It's always my very distinct honor and privilege to join all of those who have spent any time watching these podcasts over the last almost year and a half now. And we certainly enjoy making them, and we enjoy any comments or questions that others may have if they have an opportunity to view them. So, as we often do, or always do, I'm abstaining this week, so I'm drinking my flavored water, but I am raising my glass tonight to honor all those who have the wherewithal to recognize that public school system is a Marxist mind control entity. And to those that have recognized that and have placed your children elsewhere in homeschooling or charter schools or otherwise to avoid the drivel that gets pounded into them in the public school system, I am raising my glass to you and all that have taken on that challenge of finding an alternative education where they're not under that influence. Here's to you.
Yeah, great one. Cheers to that. It's no easy feat.
No, it is not. So much of what we talk about, I think, is really, and many of our associates that do similar podcasts and similar shows, we're always talking about waking people up and trying to get them awake. And, I think over the last couple of weeks, we talked about the bread and circuses and the distractions and so on. But a quote that I have for tonight that I think ties into that, and I may have used it before, but I think it specifically aligns well with what we've been talking about. And the quote is, "The men the American people admire most extravagantly are the most daring liars. The men they detest most violently are those who try to tell them the truth." And that came from H.L. Mencken. I know we've used some of his. I don't know if we used that one. But I think so much of what we, as freedom fighters, as people committed to try to restore the republic, so much of what we are trying to overturn is lies. And we, as you've mentioned several times, we are down this path of lies generations now. And I've even said for centuries, which means more than one. And I think I'm going to try to highlight that tonight as we get into the show. But before we do that, I wanted to make a correction from last week. We did raise our glass to Tina Peters, and I wanted to make sure I went back and corrected that because I think at least twice in the show I called her Tina Peterson, and it should, of course, only be Tina Peters. And we continue to offer our prayers and our thoughts and all those who are working to get Tina back on the right side of the fence, so to speak, as she has been wrongfully incarcerated simply for questioning and looking into what many of us know and believe was a rigged election. So I wanted to mention that. Another thing I wanted to talk about briefly from last week, we had talked about the underground facilities that have been funded, or there's a lot of speculation about these underground facilities that have been funded on the American taxpayers' dollar. And what
Mm-hmm.
people really need to understand, if there is one shred of truth to that, $21 trillion stolen from us to pay to protect themselves. These people work for us. They steal from us and build for themselves, or there's much speculation that they have a place to run and hide if things get ugly. We ought to be completely incensed about this very idea that the people that are working for us, that we chose to send into office on our behalf, are stealing from us to build them a place to go run and hide should there be cataclysmic events, whether it be nuclear conflict or civil unrest or some other thing. They have built these, or much conjecture to that, have built places for them to run and hide. We should be demanding, we should be screeching at the top of our lungs that we want full disclosure on this, because if you people put on our kids and our grandkids and their grandkids a burden to fund a place for you to run and hide, while that money could have been spent for other purposes here in this country, we ought to be at the top level of being enraged.
Well, to me, that's one of the most maddening things about how defensive the leftist cult is about this money that we're trying to call attention to that has been stolen. There's such a large faction of the left that is very upset about the waste, fraud, and abuse coming to light. And to go back to the point we make time and time again here, these elitists, this global cabal, this global network of power hungry control freaks, they want most of us gone. They've made that very clear. They want the population shrunk to a mere percentage of what it is now. And things like this, no matter how much truth exists in that, only further proves that to be so. This is some sort of potential safe haven in case of some sort of cataclysmic event. And the left, they bitch and moan because we're calling out this waste, fraud, and abuse. But to me, my thing is always like, do you think you're invited? Do you do you
Mm-hmm.
think this number that they're trying to shrink the population to, you're included in that? Is that why you don't care and you're upset about it? Because I assure you, you're not in the club. And you're not getting invited to these underground networks that this trillion and trillion and trillion of dollars of your dollars is going to. You're not actually part of that community, no matter how much you latch on to the narratives that they sell you. That's just to keep you in their control and under their thumb. You're not getting invited to that party.
Precisely. Yeah, and so I wanted to mention that, not to go back and spend too much time on last week, but another highlight before we get into the meat of tonight's subject that I think is worth discussing momentarily here. I see that Mike Johnson, Speaker of the House, is now considering or having proposed a $4 trillion elevation of the debt limit. And we're supposed to be cutting all this waste, and the Doge is in there looking for waste, fraud, and abuse, and all these various agencies. But we continue to raise the debt ceiling. So I don't really understand how those two things marry up, and we feel like we're gaining any ground. I really don't, if that is the case, and if they do push through a $4 trillion debt ceiling increase, we are clearly still not on the right path. So I don't know whether it's the permanent deep state that we've talked about on numerous occasions or other things, but despite what appears to be efforts from the Trump administration, we have not slowed down spending, even though we may have identified some terrible places where money was being wasted and misspent. So I found that to be, specifically troubling, even though a lot of what I have found the Trump administration, at least in the appearance of trying to rectify, I largely agree with. But raising the
Yeah.
debt ceiling does not fit.
No, it goes completely against everything else that appears to be happening. It appears that waste, fraud, and abuse is being caught and cut. It appears that we're, stopping some of our involvement with a lot of the ongoing military activity that we've had in other parts of the world. So it's kind of like, if we're doing those things, then where is this extra $4 trillion going? And I guess this ties directly to the conversation that we're going to have tonight, because in the end, everything comes down to money. It comes down to this 1% of the 1% that is controlling the money on a global scale. The
Mm-hmm.
real money, not,
Mm-hmm.
not $4 trillion, like real, all the money.
Mm-hmm.
The big banks and things like that we're kind of going to get into a little bit more here. So I think you bringing that up, and then having the quote about liars and lies, all of these things flow directly into the conversation we're going to have tonight, which is a conversation that we've brought up previously, but I think we're going to expand on it a little bit more tonight. We've asked the question, is the United States a corporation? Which ties directly to these things.
Mm-hmm.
Monetary influences, lots and lots of big lies.
Mm-hmm.
And so tonight we're going to talk a little bit more about that, where that idea comes from, why those that believe it to be so, and expanding on that even more into state citizenship or sovereign citizenship.
Yeah. So that's a great way to get us started down this path. And we have touched on it before, but this subject is one that, maybe many folks on the fringe who are really trying to decide whether they want to commit to this fight to restore the republic, this may seem a little bit out of bounds, and it may seem a little bit far-fetched, but that's part of the problem. The large media outlets, the 100+ years of indoctrination have all taught us things that we believe to be true, and they are not. And one of the things that I think many of us who have been in this battle a long time, we continue to pull our hair out. Why aren't we abiding by the Constitution? They all have sworn an oath to uphold it. Why aren't we living up to it? And to go back to your lead there, this discussion tonight is largely going to focus on state citizenship, and then the sovereign thing. And I wanted to highlight the remark about a sovereign citizen. That's kind of like a dog whistle for the law enforcement. Calling yourself a sovereign, they have been able to turn that into one of those words like militia. And if you would make an announcement that a traffic stop or otherwise that you have declared yourself a sovereign citizen, I guarantee you will have 4 or 5 cop cars full of people there, because they have shared amongst themselves that these are radical anarchists and all of these things with no real understanding. So for those that might be interested in investigating what we're going to talk about here, it's always much safer to declare yourself a state citizen. And I will talk a little bit about how you do that, and I will talk a little bit about why that is such a thing. And The overarching point that you made as we got started here is the United States a corporation, and it is without question at least listed as such in the United States Code 3002, Section 15, A, B, and C states, unequivocally states, that the United States is a federal corporation and not a government. And you can find this information readily available. Just punch in USC, United States Code 3002, Section 15, A, B, and C, and it pops right up in very bold writing, and you can find this in such notable places as the Cornell Law Institute and others. It is out there. It is in the public eye. It is a fact that this is listed in United States Code. So how did all this happen and what does it mean? So most of the information that you will be able to find, if you want to look into this, relates to the Congressional Act of 1871. So when I talk about for more than a century, and I mentioned that we have been lied to and we have been misguided and we have been propagandized for centuries, that is the case because it's more than 100 years, so it's centuries. We're at 150 years now. And what happened during those times, so this was not long after the end of the Civil War, where the American continent, as it was developed, the developed areas of our country had largely been wiped out through this conflict between the North and the South that was really a banker's war, like all of them are. And in order to rebuild the infrastructure and get the country back up and going again, Congress, with no constitutional authority, made a deal with the international banking community, largely the Rothschild family, etc., out of England to borrow money. At which point there were several changes made to the organic constitution. And this is all history, folks. If you care enough and are interested enough, you can go back and do your own research and dig all this up. But the original document was, it had the United States Constitution for the United States, and the United States was not even capitalized. So at the beginning of this country, remember the 13 colonies were independent nations. They were as just as if it were France and Spain and England. They were in this, but they decided collectively that they wanted to take care of some things and have a universal currency that was shared between all of these independent states, and they had a combined military for defense purposes and so forth. That was why the Constitution was written as it was, and the organic Constitution, before it became a corporation, the organic Constitution listed those things, and those things only were within that jurisdiction. So that's a little bit of the background. I want to mention that also on many forms, government forms at one time, state citizen was listed. Now, over many years, they've been doing away with that. They've been hiding this fact. But I want to encourage everybody to get your birth certificate. Take a look at your birth certificate and see, as mine does here, it does not say that you are a U.S. citizen. It says that this is issued by the state, in my case, the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. So even your documents from birth indicate that you are a state citizen, not a citizen of the United States. But through subterfuge, through disguising, when you get issued a birth certificate and a social security number, our parents unwittingly checked you off as a U.S. citizen. Now you have declared yourself a U.S. citizen. What does that do? That makes you a piece of property. a piece of property belonging to the corporation. Remember, I just substantiated that the United States is a corporation. The United States of America is the collection of states. The United States is the corporation, as spelled out in United States Code 3002. What does that mean in the big picture? This is a Supreme Court decision. What that means is the only absolute and unqualified right of a United States citizen, that being a citizen of the corporation, the only absolute and unqualified right of a United States citizen is to residence within the territorial boundaries of the United States. And that was in U.S. versus Valentine Supreme Court case. So now you understand why nobody abides by the Constitution. They threw it away 150 years ago. They have been kidding us. There are two forms of government, or two entities called the United States of one's the United States of America. That's why you should call yourself an American. I'm not a U.S. citizen. I'm American. Or more appropriately, I'm a state citizen. So I have reams and reams and reams of court cases that support this information. Many of them say things like, let me find another one here. That one I just read is kind of the most glaring, that the only rights that you have is to reside here. None of those other rights that are spelled out in the organic Constitution and furthermore in the Bill of Rights, none of those exist once you become a piece of property that is governed by the laws of the Congress, not the laws of the Constitution. Here's another one, very interesting. There is in our political system a government of each of the several states and a government of the United States. Two distinct governments. Each is distinct from the other and has citizens of its own. All you have to do is declare it. But if you continue to call yourself a U.S. citizen, and when you fill out those forms and you check the box that you are a U.S. citizen without even knowing the backdrop, you then become a U.S. citizen. You have to declare yourself something other than that. And my recommendation is a state citizen. And anybody who might be interested, I could talk to you further about how to do that. But I have done it. And it includes, in case yet anybody believes that this is all nonsense, it includes applying for your passport, announcing that I am not a U.S. citizen, and you put it right on that passport application. You put down zeros on your social security number, and you declare yourself a citizen of the state of which you were born in, which is listed on your birth certificate or your certificate of live birth. It doesn't say U.S., it says that state. So once those things were put in place, once this new entity called the United States, which was a government that was put in place for the municipality or the 10 square miles of Washington, D.C., the organic Constitution was shoved to the background. Federal documents no longer had on there a box you could check for state citizen. They started disguising this because they don't want anybody declaring themselves a state citizen. They want everybody to willingly go along with the notion that you are a U.S. citizen, and when you declare that, you become a piece of property belonging to that corporation called the United States. Here's another one for you, in case there's more information here available. There are two classes of citizen of the United States and of the state, and one may be a citizen of the former without being a citizen of the latter. And that comes from Gardena versus Board of Registers, and that is also a court case. That one goes back to 1909. Another one, citizens of the United States does not entitle citizens to privileges and immunities of citizens of the state. Difference between citizens as the United States or citizens of the state, and this is spelled right out. Since privileges of one are not the same as the other. And that was in Tashiro versus Jordan, also a Supreme Court at the California Supreme Court. So again, I got pages and pages and pages of these court cases. The important thing to recognize or to pique your interest is, how did this happen? When did this happen? If you go back and, as I mentioned, investigate the Congressional Act of 1871, and it was modified through the next couple of years, and it was meant to be convoluted and difficult to follow. But at that time, Congress, with no authority, no constitutional authority, made a deal with the devil, the international banking communities, and we basically have been living under their rules. So talk about that globalist cabal that want to rule the world, and they have their hooks into this country and have pushed away the organic constitution that's supposed to preserve and protect our God-given rights. They don't exist. And until you take yourself out, and we all understand that anybody that has done this, that this is going to be a fight. They're not just simply going to roll over and let some of us that have followed this path through and have taken those steps. And I want to go back and highlight, by the way, I was issued my passport when applying by that means, and there's a few details you have to go through, but I made an application to the Department of State Department, for my passport as a state citizen, not a U.S. citizen, and I was issued a passport, which I have had for over 9 years now, as a state citizen.
So there's a lot of things I want to jump into. Obviously, there's so many different directions I think we could take this conversation. But the first thing I want to highlight is that last fact, that you apply for a passport the same way anyone else applies for a passport to be able to travel internationally. It is no different. So the biggest thing you'll find when researching this subject, as somebody who's never found it before, is it is all very, very much crazy conspiracy. And like you mentioned a little bit earlier, it's really kind of tied to like the same idea as militiamen, people like that. There's a lot of ties to, like, they try to tie it to white supremacy, white nationalist groups, things like this. Domestic terrorists. That same, we see this with anyone who declares any sort of patriotism, but it's shrouded in a very, very large conspiracy shadow. And it's very hard to dig into this subject because there are so many people who seek out sovereign or state citizenship for different reasons. And some of them could be nefarious. And that's how it's pretty easy to say this is all bullshit. But if it were bullshit, you wouldn't apply through the US government for a legally binding document stating that's what you are. Like, you can't say it doesn't exist if you can actually go apply for the document stating I'm a state citizen, and the government says, fair enough, you got us, and then they give it to you. So that's the first thing I feel like we have to highlight on. Like, people are really, really quick to say there's no way that this is real. This is too far-fetched. But just like all of the best conspiracies, you really have to do a lot of deep digging to get to the truth, to get to the real information. So I think it's important for people to be willing to have this conversation and be willing to look into these things further. Obviously, you brought up a ton of valid points. Like, yes, the passport, that's real. That's undeniable that it is real. But then we look at all of these other court cases that mention that, yes, it is two different things. Citizens of one is not the same as a citizen of another. And it is also two different governments. Like, this is noted time and time and time again throughout, as you said, the last 150 years. So the first thing we have to do is pull off that shadow of conspiracy and that shadow of not wanting to even acknowledge it as truth. And hopefully for our listeners, get you to at least recognize that there is truth in this before we even take the conversation further, because I really think that the biggest hang up here is that it feels so far-fetched. It feels like, how could I have not heard about this? And people just write it off so fast.
I think that is the key, and that is exactly what those and this is when people have heard us talking, and I have called them all criminals. They are all criminals because they all know about this. This is something they all know about, but yet they choose not to do anything about it because their bread gets buttered from those same people that they're protecting by not doing anything about it. So by keeping the whole idea enveloped in a cloud of mystery that this just can't be so, half the people, or more than half, will simply dismiss it without ever lifting up one page to try to prove to themselves that this is true. Probably more than half. The other ones, because this information is hidden and has been hidden for so long, it does take some digging. And that is where I would offer to any of our listeners to reach out through our website. I will point you in a direction where you can gather this information for anybody who is interested in investigating on your own. And I'm encouraging anybody and everybody to do so. But the easiest way for those that conduct this thievery of us is to keep most of us simply disregarding it because it's too far fetched and it's too big for them to get their head wrapped around. Yet they can watch what goes on around us in our lifetime. For anybody even as old as you are, Bree, that has recognized they have sent us, our kids, off to conflict with nothing to gain except wealth for the banking community and the military industrial conflict. They can either be in the middle of creating and spreading a virus and subsequently then a vaccine. You first create a dilemma, then you come up with the solution for it. This has been government's role forever and ever, amen. And you can watch these events unfolding around you and you can wear the blinders and pretend it isn't so. And that is the same thing they count on when it comes to the few people that will investigate this very thing. But we have had many, many great guests over the year, and plus that we've had many people who can talk in depth about the protections of the Constitution and all of those things. But very, very few of them are willing to talk about this subject, and they still continue to fight. Why aren't we living up to the Constitution? We got to get back to we're not living up to the Constitution because they told us all the way back in 1871 that we're going to change this document, and we are now rewriting it, and that there are two types of citizen, and as long as you declared yourself a U.S. citizen, you have placed yourself under the jurisdiction of the corporation. And U.S. Code 3002, Section 15 spells it right out. It's in big, bold letters. Exactly as I read to you that the United States is, let me read it again, USC, United States Code 3002, Section 15, A, B, and C states that the United States, all capitalized, that is the significance of a corporation. When you see all letters capitalized, that is significant in legal document of a corporation. The United States is a federal corporation and not a government. This is where it began. And now that document that was designed and put together by the founding fathers for these independent states that wanted a collective entity to manage a very small group of things, that was shoved aside, folks. So even though they're all running around with their pocket constitution, they are living up to the modified constitution, which has nothing to do simply by changing a couple of words at the beginning from the Constitution for the United States, not capitalized, of America, or the Constitution of, meaning of this entity that was only a collection of entities back in the original days. This is the simple thing that was changed at the beginning. It completely changes the context of what that Constitution is. And the organic one, the original one, was shoved to the wayside, and none of those rules of protection are no longer in place. That is why we're not living up to it. We can stand out here and scream and holler, live up to the Constitution. They're living up to the modified one.
Yeah. Well, I think we might have touched on this a little bit the first time we had a conversation about this. So for anyone listening, if you haven't already listened to our previous talk about this, it was somewhere back in the 30s, episode 33 or 4 or something like that. And I think I may have said this, or you may have said this, that is why when these government officials that swear up and down they're going to be different and they're going to abide by the will of we the people. That is why when they get in there, they do not do what they say, because they find out once they're in office that the employer is not, in fact, we the people. The employer is the corporation of the United States. So they're, in fact, employed by a corporation, not the people. And we the people don't know that. So we don't raise hell about it, which is why this cycle just continues. And it's a very big problem to face.
Mhm.
So it's, it's kind of like, where do you even start? But there's a couple things I guess I kind of have questions about and want to, have conversations about. So the first point I wanted to say, and you mentioned early on that, maybe sovereign citizen isn't a good term to use because it will catch a lot of flack and there's a lot of negativity around that. But another thing that I've heard people say who talk about this is that sovereign citizen is really like an oxymoron. And I kind of want to hear your thoughts and opinions on that, because you can't be sovereign and be a citizen of a place
Mhm.
at the same time. You're the leader or they're the leader. Like, which is it? So
That
do you have
that
an opinion on that?
yeah, that's correct. Your explanation of those two words and how they basically are in conflict with one another is exactly right. So back in the founding days, and I like to look at the Declaration and the Constitution and the Federalist Papers and all of those things. Those documents were written up with the assumption that you, the individual, were the sovereign. You are the king. We are all the king of our castle, the sovereign. So if you are a sovereign, you can't be the citizen, meaning basically the subject, especially when the corporation came into play. So the word sovereign, or the term calling yourself a sovereign, was not foreign in those days. It was generally accepted by those God given rights, meaning, as we've talked about in some of the past episodes, you have the right to do anything you want as the king, as the sovereign, up until the point that it infringes on somebody else's right to live as their king and as their sovereign. So you can do anything you want. That's what a free person, a sovereign citizen, would have. You would have the ability to live your life as you choose up until the point that it infringes on somebody else's right to live the life as they choose. That means you are the king. You're the king of your domain. You are the sovereign. And that is general outline of what that term meant in those days. Today, much like you described, if you were to declare yourself a sovereign citizen, this is the dog whistle for the police state in which we live. That is declaring, I am not abiding by your rules. And that gives them an opportunity to come and put a beating on you, or to tase you, or whatever the cops do these days. It's certainly not protecting, preserving, because if they understood these documents and what they swore they were going to be doing, they would not be the muscle for a criminal entity called the United States Corporation. This is where people have, and I think, Bree, it is so scary for the majority of people to think that I'm going to have to fight, or I'm going to have to stand up against this entity. So guess what? It's just like the IRS. Oh, they're bullies, but that's all they are. They're a bunch of punks who got their badge, and they can come up and bully people into submission, or arrest you and take away all your stuff because there's a criminal entity that they work for. They are not courageous people. They are cowards. They are not sticking up for what that document said. They are not sticking up for individual freedom and individual liberties. So they are part of the cabal. They are part of the theft system put in place, weaponized government to keep us enslaved, keep us in our place, and just bowing down and going along with whatever we are told. That is far from the sovereign citizen, sovereign person we are supposed to be
Right.
in this country, with unlimited rights
Yeah.
until you affect somebody else. That is what we are all supposed to have. But many of the people that we've quoted before in the past have recognized majority of people are afraid of true freedom. They want boundaries. They want somebody to say you can't go outside that line or you can't go outside this line. It's much easier. They don't have to be held accountable. I'm staying within the line, so I'm good. Where if you have total freedom, now you are accountable for your own actions. People don't want that. That
Right.
is too big of a nut to crack. They would just rather stay penned in and have somebody dictate to them. But there are some of us who simply find that absolutely appalling that somebody else would tell me how to live my life. It absolutely grates on me every time I have to comply with an order by somebody else. That means I don't have that freedom. I don't have the freedom that the blood of our forefathers, going all the way back to those people starving, coming across the ocean in ships and setting up little cabins and fending for themselves on this land, went the hardship they went through to give to us unlimited freedom. And we let it slip away because we'd rather stay boxed in with somebody telling me, don't go here, don't go there, can't do this, can't do that. It's chicken shit. We are a country of chicken shits, and that's why we are in this box we're in. This is a solution, and believe me, if you choose to take this path, you have to be ready for the fight because you will have them. And
Right.
and is it daunting? Absolutely. Or is it a clear path to not ever be in trouble? Absolutely not. Because you are the outlier. You are the oddball. If there was a whole bunch of us out here doing this, guess what? It gets much more difficult to manage. If there's one or twos here and there, it's pretty easy to manage. And that's where we're at today. But I really would encourage anybody to look some of this stuff up. Look those U.S. codes up. You can look in any legal, law thing that you can find on the internet, Cornell Law Institute, other things with the very notable and reputable organization, and it's all right there. It is all right there. It is just that we pay so little attention. Talk about, like we did 2 weeks ago, the bread and circuses, the distractions, the people are doped up and watching silliness and very little participation in anything political. Maybe they vote once every 4 years during a presidential election. We are so disengaged that the people that are ripping us off the most are the very people that you put the most trust in, and that's the people that are sitting in your offices down in D.C. and your state capital, by the way.
So I think something that's important here is bringing it all home and making it, real as far as why it matters to you, the listener. And this is the part where I'll defer to you in a moment and see if this is a theory that you've also heard and if you think it is one and the same, two different things, if one is true and one is not, etc. But I know that there are a lot of people within this circle who feel this way and, kind of live outside those boundaries in this space that believe that when a child is born and when that birth certificate is issued, that is the government basically creating a trust or corporation in your name. So now it's not just that the United States is a corporation and that you are a piece of property owned by the corporation, but this birth certificate, what people say it here is that your birth certificate is how the United States, the corporation, determines that you are also a corporation owned by that higher entity corporation. And that is why you are basically being used as collateral for the debts that our country owes, going back to the global banking elites, the Rothschilds, Great Britain, other countries that we have our debts to. So I don't know, Dad, if you think this is kind of the same thing or if you think this is two different things, but regardless of if you view the birth certificate as another piece of like, hey, this is what proves that you're a piece of property that we own, or not, the end result is the same. And that's why it makes it important to how you live your life and how it affects you, because the end result is that this country is using your labor. And when I say this country, I mean this corporation. This country that is a corporation is using your labor, because they own you and your labor, to pay off its national debt. And that's how they do it. You are the collateral. That is why we have however many trillions of dollars in debt right now, and the ceiling always goes up, because we are not the people that they have any reason to listen or adhere to. We are the collateral that they are allowed to continue to take money out because of. So if you want to elaborate on that a little more, or what your thoughts are.
So I've read up on some of that, and I can't disagree with your explanation there. I've heard a couple of different things, and this is where you get into the weasel words that the lawyers and stuff like that use. But it's created a straw man entity. I've heard that term. I've also heard that a corporation has to deal with a corporation. That's why you have been made a corporation or part of this superior corporation. So that's getting into the weeds a little bit more than what I have total clarity on. But I can tell you that there is supporting documents, including U.S. codes, that say it is a corporation. Now, what they have to do to you, or what documents they have to issue to make you compliant with that corporation, may include the birth certificate, may also include the Social Security number. And at that point, when you're an infant and you're issued your Social Security number, you have absolutely no way of understanding any of this. And somebody checks off the box that you're a U.S. citizen, because the state citizen doesn't appear on there anymore. So automatically you have put yourself into that realm. Now, whether that document also makes you a corporation that the corporation called the United States can then deal with, that's getting into the weeds a little bit. The other thing I wanted to mention, back in 1933, I think they took possession of all the property. You're only renting your property. You don't own that property. And that was also used as collateral. And there's a lot of information. I was paging through my stuff here. I had such a stack of papers here tonight. I knew we were going to get off in the bushes. I even have documents from when my passport was issued, official U.S. documents from government agencies, in addition to receiving my passport. I had the documents that went in as part of my application. And this is where there's something to it. If they don't come and make a big deal about it. They just want me to go along with my life and not rock the boat, or not try to get other people awakened to this. They want you to just be going along. And largely I am. I've bucked the system a little bit here and there. And generally, you know, depending on how far you want to go with it, they will bleed you out of money. This is the whole game. If you get in and you're going to fight them tooth and nail, and I want all those rights that are guaranteed to me by the organic constitution, they're going to just keep you in court until you run out of money, and then you're out of the fight. And until there are more of us willing to get in there and say, nope, we're going back to the way it was, and all you criminals that have been stealing from us and feeding money out to wars and vaccines and departments of education to keep us all dumbed down, all of these things, we're taking it all back, and we're going to wind down this spending. Just think about that. You know, the spending is such a big issue that you hear a lot of people talk about. I'm going to call within the freedom movement, within the Restore the Republic movement. But just think if we would have stayed within the constitutional bounds. For example, you know, we talk about, well, all these social programs, you know, the government's taking care of this and it's bailing out the drowning economy in certain time, you know, during the COVID and all. Show me where. Show me one sentence in that document that gives them the authority to do that. Show me where they have the right to get us in Korea, into Vietnam, into Desert Storm, into Afghanistan. There was no declaration of war. The trillions and trillions of dollars, in addition to the lives maimed and lost, that was conducted on the people, American people, by criminals who were doing it for nothing but padding their wallet. They send our kids off to war to get their asses shot off for their financial gain. This is what we got to wake up to. There needs to be Nuremberg trials. I'm sorry. These people have sent the best of us, off to fight wars that had absolutely nothing to do with preserving the liberty of this country. We can all stand out there and wave our flag on Memorial Day and the 4th of July, rah, rah, rah. They have butchered and maimed generations of us for their financial gain. This is the way we got to look at it. And anybody who goes in there and does not fight vehemently every day of their existence in Congress or in the courts or in any elective office is going along with the criminality that has put us in this position.
Yeah, that's right. And that's another thing I wanted to bring up when I said that, we need to make this matter to people. Like, why should you care? Why will it make your life different? And one thing that you mentioned earlier with one of those court cases that you brought up, and maybe you don't have the exact one right in front of you at the moment. I know you've got a lot of papers to sift through.
I'm looking through them.
The one thing you brought up was that the rights guaranteed to each type of citizen are not the same. Your right as a citizen to the corporation, the United States, is only to live here. But your right, according to the organic, original Constitution, is life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. It is to live however you want with no one dictating over you ever, ever. Like, when we talk every week about all of the different things that we have going on in this world that make us not free, and how, free men don't need permits, and yet we're surrounded by 1 million permits in this country that claims to be the most free. This is the stuff we're talking about. If we were following that true original document, none of these permits, none of these other insane levels of authority would be going on around us ever. Because we have an inherent right to liberty in every sense of the word. And because this fake document that we are now living under, that is quite old compared to you and I, and, it's been around for a while now that we've been living this way as a country, it took those rights away. And we can keep fighting for them, but we're just going to keep butting our head against a wall. Because that document is no longer there. So the battle is so much bigger than we think. It's so much more than just telling, your senator, your local representative that you want them to vote no on the next bill about whatever the hell. Yep. It is so much bigger of a problem than that. Yep. And it will not change until more people wake up to it. I mean, that's the only solution. Am I wrong? Do you think there's another way out of it?
No. That is precisely what needed to be said. We are to have unlimited freedom. The only thing that can limit you is if you reduce somebody else's opportunity for unlimited freedom. What's government's job? Government's job was to protect that very thing. Unlimited liberty. I don't care what you want to put into your body. I don't care what you want to do in your bedroom. I don't care any of that. That is up to you. And unless you are infringing on somebody else's right to do what they want to do, nobody has a right to tell you any differently. Today we got them telling us what size Coke bottle we can buy. What kind of lunacy? How big of a wattage of light bulb we can put in our house. This is the nonsense that we, by being sheep, and I'm telling you folks, that is what we are. A nation of sheep begets a government of wolves. From Edward R. Murrow 100 years ago came out with that. And we have become a nation of sheep, too interested in picking up our bag of Doritos and our 6-pack of beer to come home and turn some blather on that idiot box than to look at what we have lost. We have lost everything. And just as you described, it is so much bigger. All this theater, even with the Trump administration in there, it is theater. It is to give the illusion that they are down there, or one side or the other is fighting for you, whichever side you prefer, red or blue team. It's all together. They have all together foisted this criminality upon us, where we get to go, oh, the red team's in there, we're going to lean this way. The blue team's in there, we're going to lean this way. And they're all sitting down there in a bar tonight, down there in front of the Capitol, yucking it up, laughing their ass off on your dime. getting ready to send your kids off to the next damn war that gets started someplace in this world, whether it's over in the Middle East, Ukraine, Taiwan, or wherever. This is going to happen. They're going to send them off, and we're going to get our flags and pound the drums and rah, rah, rah. We need to be supporting Ukraine. We need to do this. We need to do that. No, we don't. We need to be left the hell alone and have unlimited freedom to live the life that we want to live with nobody interfering. That is what the blood of our forefathers purchased for us, and we let it run right out of our hands without a whimper. That's what angers me every single day, that we're not connecting with people to wake up. We are to have unlimited freedom, and government's only job is to preserve that for all of us, each individual.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And that's what we're pushing for. That's the end goal here. And I think that it's so easily misconstrued, because what we really truly want, is ultimate freedom. We want people to become more self-sufficient. We want people to become self-governing. We want people to become sovereign, truly sovereign, not this bullshit definition that some corporation created for you. We want people to work outside of this system. That is the whole goal, for more people to be outside of this bullshit system. We need more people outside of it so the system falls apart, so that the system collapses, because they don't have enough little entities residing in it anymore. So I think people get confused, because it's like, why do you keep talking about politics? Why this? Why that? If you want people out of the system, why are you even participating in the system? And I get that. It feels a little confusing, but it's like, you have to wake up to all of the bad things going on before you realize, oh, this is how bad it is. Oh, I see. And I think that's really what we're trying to do here, is wake people up to all the problems, because you're not going to wake up to the biggest problem if you haven't woken up to the small ones. So you have to start seeing the small ones. You have to start understanding how they connect to each other. You have to start being able to talk about them and feel comfortable in why you believe what you do. And then you can start to really back yourself out of the system, because your foundation is good. You understand what the problem is. You know that you can't work within that system anymore, because that system doesn't give a shit about you. It doesn't give a shit about your family. It claims to be providing for you with all of these government services. That's the opposite of what those are doing. They're keeping you enslaved with those services. So that's really the heart of what we're doing here on this podcast, I think, is trying to make people aware of all of these things in the system, so that in time you feel confident enough to back all the way out of it.
I think that is great, and the quote that you had mentioned, and I think it's worth going back over. This is so much bigger than what almost everybody is talking about. I don't care what show you listen to, what podcast, where you go for information. They're not going down to the root of the problem. We're dancing around, well, we should codify this or we should codify that, which simply means, okay, we're just going to touch on this for a second. So Trump has issued, a couple hundred executive orders, many of which were rescinding laws that most of us didn't agree with. But bigger than that, most of which don't comply with the Constitution. So what we want to do is get back to the level of rights. Oh, it'll just be anarchy. This is the argument. It'll be anarchy. We need all these rules. We need all these laws. No, you don't. It's as simple as, if I steal from somebody, you create a victim. If I damage somebody else's property, you created a victim. Those are all very basic things. And by the way, they're all spelled out in the Ten Commandments. You really want to get down to the root of it. If I have not infringed on somebody else, nobody has a right to tell. That is what we are supposed to do. Instead, we have this. I'm going to read it again. The only absolute and unqualified right, meaning not managed in any way, the only absolute and unqualified right of a United States citizen, somebody who has declared themselves a United States citizen and not taken themselves out, the only absolute and unqualified right of a United States citizen is to residence within the territorial boundaries of the United States. That's the only right you got as a member of that corporation. Not all this stuff in the Constitution, the Bill of Rights. Forget all that. If you are still under there, if you are still declaring yourself a United States citizen, the only right you have is to live in the territorial boundaries. That is it. So when you say, why aren't our constitutional rights being protected? They told you why they're not. They told you why they're not. Because you are now living under a corporation government, not the organic, constitutionally protected government, which is unlimited freedom. So that is how big this thing is. And we probably lost 95% of the people that just saying, I'm not messing with that. I'm just going to go along. But remember, the first go around was a very small percentage, small percentage of people that said, that's the life I risk. I risked my life sailing across this ocean in a wooden boat, probably sicker than a dog, with nothing much to eat, and got over here and scratched out a living and set up a life for themselves and said, I am free. I am free to live my life as I choose. Practice the religion I choose. Engage in whatever your sexual preferences might be. Engage in growing whatever kind of weeds you want to smoke or eat or anything else out in the backyard. That was the freedom that they fought for. They died for, and they gave to us. And we sit back and say, well, Congress isn't getting much done. I'm really hoping to get some things done for the people. No. I hope the hell they stay out of the way of the people. It's a part-time job, folks. Send them home. And by the way, send the crooks and sitting on the Supreme Court home too, because they ain't looking out for you either. They're not looking out for you. They're only looking out for that entity called the corporation, the United States.
Yep, absolutely. That we could go down so many rabbit holes with this, and I think that's the big thing, is that this conversation in itself feels like a rabbit hole. And you know what? For people who have listened this long to this conversation, believe what you want. Believe it or don't, that's real. There's plenty of resources to prove that, like, this is something that really happened. If you want to look into it for far enough, the answers are there. And when you find that truth, when you find this to be reality, what you choose to do with it is up to you. You said it early in the show, Dad. It's a big undertaking to commit to. You're not just going to sign your rights away as whatever, citizen you currently are to become a state citizen and expect it's going to be a walk in the park forever. There are ways people do this. Obviously, Dad, one solution that you gave tonight is you're using yourself as a resource. If people have questions about this, really come to the website and submit a question on there, and Pops will get back to you and explain how you can go down this route. But there are actually quite a lot of groups that teach people how to do this, because it's not as rare as you think. It sounds like this is like deeply fringe, but it's really not. There's actually a lot of people that do this. And I think, and maybe you would have a little more info on this than me, I think even people from other countries have similar situations, and there are people in other countries that do similar things to becoming a state citizen in their own country, because this, as we've discussed many, many times, this is not just a United States problem. This is a global problem. And this is why the corporation exists, because of its ties to this global cabal. Like, once again, another proof of this global cabal's existence. That's why this all came to be in the first place. So this actually is something that exists in other countries. And the reason that I brought up the birth certificate thing is because I know there are people who work specifically with women who are pregnant who want to give birth without filling out a birth certificate and a social security number and going down that road and even putting you in the system. So there are ways to do that. Hopefully we'll be able to contact some of these people and work with them on potentially coming on the show to share some of this information, because there are people who have this information and who help people to do it every day. So it sounds very ominous and scary and like it's way too big of a problem to immerse yourself in, but there are a lot of people doing it. There are a lot of people recognizing it, and the truth is in there. You have to sift through a lot of crap, like everything else, to find it. But I mean, this conversation that we're having is a very big conversation worth having. And if you want to figure out how to work outside of the system, there are options to do so.
Yeah, you gave me a lot of points I want to touch on. Uh, Number one, I think this whole topic is viewed like vaccine injuries.
Mm-hmm.
If we just, the majority of people that went along aren't going to admit that these vaccine injuries are occurring, because then it would expose that they were wrong and their choice was wrong, and all of the crap that they gave us who were deciding not to go through with it will have been, in vain. And I think people that have gone down this path are largely in that same boat. We're vaccine deniers, etc. We're kind of in that same category. So the system, that being big government, big media, big pharma, is going to pander to those that have accepted this notion that we're the fringe and this is an outlier of an idea. So they will strengthen those folks over here rather than saying, yeah, that's right. Another point I wanted to mention was, we pointed out in United States Code 3002 that it spelled right out that the United States is a corporation, and that coincided with the back around that time period of the Congressional Act of 1871. If this were not true, would it appear in the United States Code? Furthermore, why would they do it? If the Constitution in its organic form was functioning to their benefit, or to the way it was supposed to, which was not their benefit, why would they need to change it? It was changed to accomplish a goal.
Right.
It was changed with very little fanfare. A couple little words and capitalization gets changed, and it alters the whole meaning. Why would that need to be done in secret, in hiding, without everybody being educated, if it was something that was going to benefit you or designed to benefit us, the sovereigns of this country? It simply was not. It was done to steal from you, to rob, steal, and kill you in foreign wars and or otherwise. That is why it was done. It was not done to the benefit of the people that the organic Constitution was there to protect. Otherwise, why would they have to change it? And it was changed. It was changed. You can look at the original in script, and you can see the words that were written, and it was changed. And that is why we no longer live by the organic Constitution. And the only right you have, sorry to say, everybody who's out there, the only right you have is to residence within the territorial jurisdiction of the United States, that corporation. That should be terrifying to everybody, and it should get you up off the couch and say, you know what, I am not going to tolerate this, and take a stand. The other point I wanted to mention, isn't it interesting? There are a lot of us, several million of us have done this. That's a pretty significant number. By the way, it's probably in that 2 to 3% range. We keep hearing that's kind of where it's at. It's in that range. So anyway, as you mentioned, I have a lot of information willing to share. By the way, when we started, myself and a couple other friends all did this at the same time. We all received our passports from the State Department. We all have been under the state citizenship status for almost 10 years now. But we researched it for almost 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
We got together on a regular basis. Once every 6-8 weeks, we got together, all of us pouring through information, looking for support. Because believe me, this was scary to us too, to think about taking this step and what is that going to do to us. But we, in the end, decided to do it. We did it together and have been living under that status since that particular time, almost 10 years. So I will be coming up on a passport when you got to reapply for my passport, because my 10 years under that one is drawing near. So I will be reapplying under the same conditions that I did the last time, and that will be as a state citizen.
I think that's a really interesting point that you brought up. It feels very simple, but I think it's a really good takeaway from all of this. You know, people have been talking, especially since COVID, oh, I'm going to get together with my friends. We're going to buy land. We're going to have a small community, so we can be off grid and this and that. Cool. That group of friends, that's the group that you sit down and have this conversation with. Like, if you have people in mind that you're close with that you think would buy into this idea, have this conversation with them, because I think that's the perfect approach. You have a network, you have your small community, so you have people to lean on. You bounce ideas off of each other. Maybe one of you encounters something that the other 3 or 4 didn't. Great. Now he can pass that back to the group, and so on. So you have a much bigger opportunity to learn about this if you expand the network that you're kind of going through the process at the same time. I think that's a great solution to take away from this conversation if it's something you want to look into. One, reach out, ask the questions. Two, form a small circle of people that you maybe want to try this with, and at the very least start researching it. Research the hows and the whys, and get into the weeds with it, because it's actually a really wildly interesting conversation, even just from a historical standpoint.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And the other thing I wanted to mention, and I'll show it again, every single one of us was born a state citizen. And nowhere on that document I'm holding up, nowhere on that document does it say anything about you being a citizen of the United States. It says the state in which you were born, the certificate is issued from. So we all started out that way. And through no fault of our parents, we certainly can't go back and blame them, because they had already been indoctrinated into the system and had already been educated by a propaganda arm of this whole cabal. And so they didn't know anything about this, and we can't blame them. But we all have a choice. We can all exercise that choice. And many, many of these documents that you filled out years ago, including the passport application, had a box that you could check for state citizen. And there are many cases, court cases, that support that, and many court cases that support there are different rights belonging to each. And the only right you have, as long as you're part of that corporation, is the right to reside here. The rest are gone. And that's why we largely, as a country, don't have them.
Yeah, and we don't have to get too far into like the personal details of how this stuff has worked over the years, but I will say that firsthand, I've seen this work in action, where if you run into a situation and you handle it correctly and you have the correct paperwork, you can get out of things that you otherwise wouldn't have been able to, because you now have rights again that they cannot question, that they have to go along with, because it is actually legally binding.
Yep, there's a world of information out there. There are groups, and there, like mentioned, there are millions of people now that have done this. And the more of us that stand up and take this stand and declare ourselves in that status, the more likely it is that we're going to be able to change the overall, situation in which we find ourselves. However, the more of us that simply flip it over and say, well, that's a bunch of crap, or I'm not going to do anything, the more likely that the oppression that we as a country live under, and oppression is any reduction in freedom. Any reduction in freedom is oppression, and that is only going to continue to get more. Remember, every law that is written, and Congress gauges itself based on how many laws it writes. Every law that is written is a further reduction of a right that you at one time should have had, and the only way we get it back is by standing up.
Yeah. Well, I think it's been a great conversation. Like I said before, we could really dive into this in so many different ways. I think for tonight, I'm satisfied with where we ended. Are there any other points you want to bring up before we close it out?
No, I think it was great as well. Any time that you and I have a conversation and I feel my voice rising and the veins in my neck coming out, I know that we're on a good subject. And I know we're on something that we both, as well as our families, extended families, are committed to, and that is living as free men as we were intended. So I think it was a great show as well. I have a Bible verse that I hope ties in to close out tonight, and look forward to seeing you again soon. So the Bible verse tonight comes from Proverbs 19, verse 9. A false witness will not go unpunished, and he who breathes out lies will perish. And that means perish in hell. That's what that means. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. The big one.
Yeah, so I wanted both the quote and the verse tonight to focus on the lies, because we've been fed lies our whole lives, and the lies that we've been fed have conditioned us to plod along like a herd of sheep. But
Yeah.
not all of us are willing to do that. Some of us still have that longing in our heart for the freedom that we're supposed to have.
Yeah. And just to touch on one more point, we always close with a Bible verse, and it's important because the original Constitution, pre this change to it becoming a document of a corporation, was very, very much founded in biblical principles, which, if you read the Bible in any capacity, you'll understand that what we are supposed to have as our God-given rights as just beings on this earth is freedom. And that is why the Constitution follows the Bible in so many ways, because both grant us eternal, permanent, unwavering freedom. So the Bible verses are important. The original Constitution is important. Our want of freedom is important. And the fight for freedom has to continue on, or we will continue to see, as you said, oppression worsen. It's been 150 years since this change. In another 150 years, will there be a shred of freedom left? Unlikely. So the change has to start somewhere. We have to flip the script and turn things back the other way.
Amen. Perfect.
Well, great conversation, Pops, as always. I agree. We got a little riled up, and that's when we know it's a good episode. So hopefully our listeners think so as well. Until next week, you guys know where to find us. We will be here at 6 p.m. on Thursday. In the meantime,
stay vigilant. Good night, everybody.
Thank you so much for listening. We really do appreciate the support and truly love getting to share this message with anyone who wants or needs it. The best way for you to support the show is to subscribe, add a rating, and share with everyone you know. You can find us on Instagram, X, and at thefourthbox.com. We'll see you next Thursday at 6 p.m. Stay vigilant.